Hello, welcome to the first video in Module 2, focusing on principles of lesson planning. I'm gonna give you a heads up about lesson frameworks. Specifically, in this lecture, I will step by step address the following issues. First, what makes a lesson or components of a lesson? Second, learning objectives and content standards will be touched upon briefly. And finally, 3 basic frameworks are presented. Let's take a look at the metaphors for a lesson. Think about these ones: a variety show, climbing a mountain, eating a meal, a wedding, a menu, a conversation, doing the shopping, a football game, a symphony, or consulting doctor. So, which metaphor is the closest to your vision of an ideal lesson? There is of course no right answer, but your choice will reflect your own conception. If you can find no metaphor here which suits you, invent yourself. Before each lesson, a teacher may be overwhelmed with a bundle of questions like what to teach, how to teach, whether the students will like it or not, how much time it will take, and so on. Therefore, as teachers, we need to pay attention to context for learning, students' backgrounds, interests, and needs. Now, let's see what those metaphors imply and see if the analysis fits your own approach. First, a variety show is essentially pleasing and involves mixed stimulating components. If you chose it, you see variety and enjoyment as key factors in a lesson. You probably see the learner as an audience to be motivated and stimulated rather than made to work. Climbing a mountain is essentially a challenge. The corresponding lesson involves therefore an investment of effort on the part of learners and teachers. May not be particularly pleasurable while in process, but provides rewards in the form of successful achievement of the aim. However, there is the corresponding danger of failure and disappointment if this aim is not attained. Eating a meal is like a lesson if the latter is seen basically as the performance of some important or necessary function, combined with some feelings of satisfaction and pleasure. Learning is perhaps seen as essentially receptive, a matter of intake rather than of effort and initiative. A wedding is a largely ritual, though meaningful event. The corresponding lesson is therefore, to some extent, structured, with certain routines and conventions. The roles and relationships are also predetermined and fairly rigid. It is to a large extent the adequate performance of these routines and maintenance of roles which determines its success. What about a menu? In contrast, it involves choice and flexibility. It is not, however, concerned with outcomes. If you chose this one, you are more interested in possibilities, options, and success than in the final product in terms of successful learning. If you chose conversation, you probably see the lesson as a rather informal social event, where what is important is communication and the formation and maintenance of good relationships between participants. The teacher would be seen as the facilitator of interaction, and much of the initiative would be taken by the learners. Doing the shopping is the successful performance of a series of necessary business transactions, where the shopper has usually pre-planned list of things to do and an itinerary. The lesson, therefore, would be essentially a systematic and goal-oriented progression through a prepared set of items, with the emphasis on efficiency and completion of tasks. A football game like a mountain climb involves the investment of effort in order to achieve a defined aim. But here, the effort is made as a team, and social interaction, whether cooperative or competitive, is important. There are also elements typical of such games, such as the existence of rules and a referee challenge tension, which you may find applicable. If you see a lesson as a symphony, then what interests you perhaps is the aspect of aesthetic variation and order, the combination of different themes, tempo, volume, tone, and so on, that go to make a full and balanced program, and make it likely that learners will enjoy the lesson. There is also the aspect of harmonious cooperation, of working together to create a shared, satisfying result. Lastly, the lesson seen as a consultation with a doctor implies a certain relationship between teacher and learner that parallels that between doctor and patient, where the first is authoritative and takes most of the responsibility and initiative in interaction, and the second is mainly receptive and obedient. Another facet of the same relationship is the caring attitude of the professional towards the client, and the trust of the client in the professional. So far, we've just touched upon basic aspects of the lesson. Number 1. Transaction or series of transactions. This is expressed in the metaphors of shopping, a wedding, and a meal, with the emphasis on some kind of purposeful give and take, which results in a product, an acquisition, or a mental or physical change in the participants. If you care about the transactional element, then what is important to you is the actual learning which takes place in the lesson. Number 2. Interaction. This is most obvious in the metaphor of conversation, but it is also expressed in the wedding, the variety show, and in perhaps a rather different way in the football game. Here, what is important are the social relationships between learners, or between learners and teacher. A lesson is seen as something which involves relaxed, warm interaction that protects and promotes the confidence and happiness of all participants. Number 3. Goal-oriented efforts involving hard work like climbing a mountain or a football game. This implies awareness of a clear, worthwhile objective, the necessity of effort to attain it, and resulting sense of satisfaction and triumph if it is achieved, or of failure and disappointment if it is not. Number 4. A satisfying, enjoyable experience like in a variety show, a symphony, eating a meal. This experience may be based on such things as aesthetic pleasure, fun, interest, challenge, or entertainment. The main point is that participants should enjoy it and therefore be motivated to attend while it is going on. Number 5. A role-based culture, where certain roles involve responsibility and activity, others responsiveness and receptivity, which is shown in the metaphors like consultation with a doctor, a wedding, eating a meal. All participants know and accept in advance the demands that will be made on them and their expected behaviors. This often implies, first, number 6, a conventional construct with elements of ritual. Certain set behaviors occur every time. For example, a certain kind of introduction or ending, and the other components of the overall event are selected by an authority from a limited set of possibilities. In contrast, there is a series of free choices, like in a menu or a conversation. Participants are free to do their own thing within a fairly loose structure and construct the event as it progresses through their own decision-making. There is no obvious authority figure who imposes choices. Now, let's move on talking about lesson frameworks. Why are you teaching this lesson? What requisite skills do students need in order to assess the lesson and participate fully? How does this lesson fit in the curriculum? How does the lesson build on previous lessons or previous learning? By asking yourself those questions, you have just depicted in your mind the goals or aims of the lesson in accordance with the curriculum and series of lessons as a whole picture. Another important part of a lesson framework is learning objectives. We need to bear in mind 3 points here. What do you want students to think, know, understand, and/or be able to do? Describe observable, measurable actions. The learning objectives should align with the content standards identified. Do you have any framework in your mind? In this lecture, I'd like to talk about the most common lesson frameworks in English language teaching, namely test, teach, test, presentation, practice, production, and task-based approach. Let's see what they are like and how they are different. Framework number 1. Test, teach, test. It's good for checking what students already know and makes it quite easy to check that language input has been understood. It is advisable to use this framework for language-based lessons, specifically grammar and vocabulary. Lead-in. Generate interest in the topic. Test 1. Give students a matching, categorizing, ordering, get feel, etc. to check what they already know. For example, if your target language is 10 vocabulary items, you could get students to match the words with the correct definition. Feedback to Test 1. Check what students get right. Give language input or clarify what they didn't understand. Remember, when introducing new vocabulary, always think NFPA, meaning, form, pronunciation, appropriacy. Test 2. Controlled practice of the target language. Give students a chance to put what you just clarified into practice. For example, if you did a matching task in Test 1, maybe you could do a get feel in Test 2, while learners choose the appropriate word in context. Freer practice. Give students a chance to use the language in a freer context, discussion questions, role play, etc. Framework number 2. Presentation, practice, production. I often hear teachers call this the traditional PPP method, which seems to have negative connotations. I'm not sure it's so bad. It serves a purpose, but is considered a deductive approach. Language inputs can always be made more student-centered though. Basically, you present the target language, give students plenty of controlled practice. Then, the production stage is like a freer practice. Lastly, task-based learning approach is a variant of communicative language teaching, and it focuses on the preparation for, doing of, and reflective analysis of tasks that reflect real-life needs and skills. We've been using TBL approaches with these main components. Pre-task. Students prepare for completion of the core task. They are given appropriate language input or choose the language they need themselves. The core task is modeled. Success criteria is highlighted. Core task. Students complete the main task. Post-task. Extension work based on the main task, which normally involves feedback or use of main task content, delayed error correction, etc. Actually, the difficulties in defining key stages of a TVL lesson highlight an important point when using these frameworks. They are all outlines and are useful for general reference, but they are not rigid. They are really useful when you're starting out, and I honestly do still refer to them now and again. Even so, the more confident you become with your own teaching practice, the more you will shape these frameworks, extend them, try stuff completely new, etc. In the meantime, I do hope the summary above has helped to clarify a few things. Final stage of a lesson should be reflective commentary, which involves the analysis of student work by choosing 3 samples of student work and answer the following questions. Did each student meet your learning objectives? If so, how did they meet the objectives? In what areas did students have difficulty? Were the adaptations or accommodations for the lesson appropriate? Why or why not? Was the assessment appropriate for all students? Why or why not? Generally, we just talked about the components of a lesson, questions to ask yourself before a lesson, and 3 basic lesson design frameworks, namely test, teach, test, PTC, and task-based approach. See you in the next video about functions of lesson planning.